This is the Solomonster Soundoff Holiday Q&A exclusively here on TVTraX on YouTube. I am the Solomonster. This has been a long time in the making here. My apologies for the delay in getting this done. I had wanted to get this done a lot sooner, but life had other issues. You guys know how that goes. So I had to weed out a whole bunch of questions that were dated, but I pulled as many of the questions as I could fit, just dumped them all in a document here. This is from a video that was put up a while back on Trax. You guys put all of your questions in that video, and so that's where the questions are coming from here. I'd say there's probably about 70 or so in here, and that does not even include nearly all of the ones that were submitted. So if I don't get to your question, please do not be offended. I promise that we'll do more of these in the new year. Before I get going here, I just want to say thank you to anybody who listens to my show through the clips that Trax posts here on this channel. I know not everybody listens to the full shows. They can't, or they don't have the attention span for it, whatever it may be. If you've supported the show, though, in any way, even if it is just by these clips, thank you. This has been our biggest year yet, and hopefully 2018 will be even bigger. And it goes without saying, TVTraX, lots of love and support to him. He's been a big supporter of the podcast now for a number of years, and he knows how much I appreciate the hell out of him for all of his support. So without any further ado, let's dive right into your questions here. This first one here, Undertaker. Losing to Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 33 was not Undertaker's perfect retirement match. Let me explain. Undertaker wrestling Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns in a triple threat match for the Universal title in New Orleans is perfect for his last match ever. He would be simultaneously wrestling the only two competitors that have ever beaten him at Mania and wrestling at the same venue where the streak was broken. Do you agree? No, I do not. I could see where people might like the idea of Undertaker wrestling one more time. If you're an Undertaker fan, him going out the way he did against Roman Reigns, it wasn't the prettiest thing in the world. It was not the highest note for him to go out on, so I get it. If you don't want his lasting memory to be losing a bad match to Roman Reigns, then sure, you probably like the idea of him coming back and getting a win. I mean, I presume in this case you would want him to win the championship and then retire and I guess vacate the title. That would probably make a lot of people happy. It's a nice moment. I will say, I do think that, adding Undertaker to Lesnar and Reigns, if that is the plan for WrestleMania to do Lesnar and Reigns, adding him in there would make it more interesting. It would make it more of an interesting match than just a straight-up single. But my opinion is that the match at 33 should be it. He did not look great. He looked his age. It was not a good match. I just thought it was sad to watch. And I just don't think he needs to be involved in any more WrestleMania main events. It's time to move on. That's just how I feel. I don't mind him making appearances. I don't mind seeing him tombstone people here and there or chokeslam people here and there. But that image of him lowering down to hell and the lights going out, I think is the perfect send-off for that character. Who is the greatest wrestler who could have been big but did not have the charisma which held them back? You could probably come up with a laundry list of guys like that. I don't know that I would call him the greatest, but one of the people I thought of when I first saw this question was Lance Storm. I think Lance Storm was really good. Yeah, I think if he had more natural charisma and personality, he would have been a lot bigger than he was. Bobby Lashley is another one that I think of. I think the work that he's done in Impact these last few years has been great. He's shown way more personality now than he ever did in all of his years, I think, combined, probably working in WWE. Now, I don't know if that was just inexperience or if they just didn't tap into something that was already there, but Lashley in WWE, I think, was a bore. And I think the Lashley of today could easily be the champion on Raw or SmackDown. I mean, as a matter of fact, I think if Lashley came back to WWE now, I mean, I'm sure their plans for Mania for Brock are already set in stone. But you look at the different people who could go up against Brock Lesnar, who could go up against him in a believable way and challenge him for the championship. I think Lashley, today's version of Lashley, could be that guy. I think it's kind of a shame he didn't already come back. Maybe they could have, maybe it could be Lashley and Brock at WrestleMania this year instead of it being probably Lesnar and Roman. But those are two of the names, though, that popped into my head. What will happen first? A women's match of any kind headlining a WrestleMania, or a singles match between two black wrestlers headlining WrestleMania? It astounds me that in 33 Manias there has never been a one-on-one match between two black wrestlers to main event. It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, it's such a small group of guys. I mean, I'm willing to bet that if you wrote down all the WrestleMania main events on paper, you're going to see a lot of overlap. So they have their stars, and they just keep going back to the same people over and over again. That's just what they do. Which do I think is going to happen first? I think a women's main event at WrestleMania will probably happen before we see two black wrestlers going one-on-one in the main event. That's what I think. Who do you think should induct Rey Mysterio into the Hall of Fame? The only person I can think of who can induct him is Conan, but Conan might not be popular or a popular pick for management. Well, I mean, it should be Conan. I mean, I know the two of them are really close. Never say never, though. I mean, they brought back Jim Cornette to induct the Rock and Roll Express, so I don't think they're on that, bad of terms with Conan. So it's possible. But I think if it's not him, Chavo would make the most sense. I think he'd be appropriate. It's just too bad because it really should have been Eddie. This person says, I started watching wrestling right after WrestleMania 24, and the one match that made me a fan for life was Shawn Michaels against The Undertaker at WrestleMania 26. What match made you a fan for life? Okay, so I had already been watching wrestling for a little while, but probably the first match that I can remember seeing live, which was the main event of a house show I went to. It had Macho Man Randy Savage against the Honky Tonk Man for the Intercontinental title, with Jimmy Hart locked in a shark cage hanging above the ring. I think just the spectacle of it. It was right around Christmas time in 87, I think it was. As far as TV matches go, the one that probably made me a fan for life is also the match that absolutely terrified me at the time. So I just got done talking about this on the 10-year anniversary show that I did on my channel, but I'll tell it again. So it was Hulk Hogan against King Kong Bundy, Saturday night's main event, right around New Year's, 1988. And the reason it terrified me was because Hogan beat Bundy, which is, I guess if you're not a Hogan fan, that's terrifying enough. But he beats Bundy. Andre the Giant, who had been outside in Bundy's corner, gets into the ring. Hogan is posing. He has his back turned. He does not see Andre climbing into the ring. And as he's posing, Andre sneaks up behind him. He starts choking the life out of Hulk Hogan. And as a little kid, I really thought that this man was going to die. Nobody was coming out to help him. And Andre is squeezing and squeezing, and Hogan is making these fish faces, and I'm like, why is nobody coming out to help this guy? Finally, wrestlers start pouring out from the locker room. They're trying to pull Andre off. He's throwing him left and right, goes back to choking Hogan, and then finally Jim Duggan breaks a 2x4 over Andre's back, and they're able to drag Hogan out to safety. That always stuck with me for some reason. I think all of us have these memories when we're, younger, much younger, of some kind of angle or beatdown or something that, at that age, you don't know any better. It's horrifying. And Andre was this, gigantic man. They really built him up as being, larger than life. And yeah, it just stuck with me for all these years. So I think if I wasn't already hooked on wrestling, which I probably was, I certainly was hooked then. Let's see. My question is in regards to Hulk Hogan and the fight that he had with Sylvester Stallone in Rocky III. I first saw Rocky III when I was 6, and I pictured how awesome it would have been to see Stallone make a celebrity appearance at an event like WrestleMania in character as Rocky Balboa in a rematch, quote-unquote, against Hulk Hogan, playing off their fight from the film. If said rematch took place, how well do you think the match would have been? Okay, I guess what he's asking is how good would the match have been? I don't know if he's asking how much business the match would have done. I think it would have done tremendous business as a match. It's hard to say. They had Mr. T come in and do a boxing match with Roddy Piper at WrestleMania 2, and I thought that pretty much sucked. So, as a match, it depends. I mean, it depends how much training Stallone had for it, and I think if you teach him enough, I think Lawrence Taylor is a good example of this from WrestleMania 11. They taught him just enough, right? He wasn't a pro wrestler. He came in for the paycheck. They paid him $500,000. He came in, and he worked the match. And I thought overall, even though he was completely gassed, he was sucking wind at the end of the match, I thought LT all in all looked pretty good, and Bam Bam deserves a lot of credit too. They put together a nice little match. It wasn't really, good, but it wasn't overly embarrassing. And I think Stallone would have done at least as well as LT, if not better. So I think it would have been fine. Which class of the WWE Hall of Fame is your personal favorite? My personal favorite? That's a good question. I would say it is a toss-up between 2004, which was the first Hall of Fame that they had done in many years, and this year's Hall of Fame, honestly. I was at this year's Hall of Fame. I think I had skipped the last year or two. It just, honestly, I've been to Hall of Fames before. It gets boring. It really does. It gets very boring, and so I kind of gave up on it for a year or two, but I went this year, and I'm glad I did. I really enjoyed Kurt Angle's speech. I enjoyed DDP. I enjoyed seeing Jim Cornette back and him doing his thing, and say what you want to about Cornette, but when he's in that environment and he's giving a speech and everything like that, he's very entertaining. So I thought Cornette was great. I thought Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson were great in their speech when they were out there. Rick Rude finally went into the Hall of Fame, deservedly so. I just really liked this year's class. But 2004 had the Bobby Heenan induction, which I still think is the greatest Hall of Fame speech at any of their ceremonies. And Jesse Ventura was also inducted that year. I remember really liking Don Morocco's speech and also thinking to myself, how come we don't really hear about him? And even now, even after he went into the Hall of Fame, I think they brought him back maybe to induct Fuji, if I'm not mistaken, but you don't hear about him. He doesn't make cameo appearances. I guess he's just content in, his retired life, which is cool. But I actually was pretty entertained by his speech. So I'd say either 04 or this year. Will Vince McMahon be voted out of power anytime soon? Well, not so long as he's the majority owner. He still holds most of the voting power as far as I know. So unless he votes himself out, the answer is no. Although he's starting this new Alpha Entertainment company, so who knows? Maybe he's got some plans to start breaking away from WWE soon. Who knows? Buy or sell on the better rivalry from 2011. Randy Orton against Christian or John Cena against CM Punk? I liked them both. I thought Orton and Christian was actually the feud of the year in 2011, which I guess would answer your question, but it's hard for me to vote against Cena and Punk just because I really loved that feud. And they had a whole bunch of matches that year. Obviously the Money in the Bank match was the best, I thought. But the Money in the Bank match, the SummerSlam match, I think they might have had one. I'm trying to think if they had another one at Night of Champions that year, if that was a different year. But I don't know, boy, if I had to pick one over the other, best feud from 2011, I'll give it to Orton and Christian, but just by a hair. I like them both. People often bring up the Dudleys, the Hardys, and Edge and Christian when talking about the greatest period for tag teams, but since then, it's like the division never reached that same level of competitiveness. Right now, I believe that if we take the tag division of today, this would probably be the strongest tag team division that there has ever been. What do you think? Ever? That's a big word. Ever is a very long time. Stronger, stronger than that late 80s, early 90s period of WWE with the Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation and the Killer Bees, Demolition, Strike Force, the Rockers, the Brainbusters. I can't vote against that. I cannot say that today is the best that the tag team division has ever been. Third best, maybe. Again, we're talking collectively. We're not just talking Raw only or SmackDown only. I don't even know if he's counting NXT. Not that there's that many tag teams down there to begin with, but I think if you combine the teams and you look at them overall, you can make the argument that maybe second or third strongest in the history of the company, but I can't say first. There was a period on SmackDown from 2002, 2003 that was also very, very strong. You had Edge and Rey Mysterio, Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit, Haas and Benjamin, Los Guerreros. I can't put today's tag team division over those guys. I would say this current incarnation of the division, number 3 at best. Should WWE do a women's tournament for women 205 pounds and up? It would be a great excuse to give fans another look at Piper Niven, Jazzy Gabbard, and Sage Beckett. I think one women's tournament is enough for now. I'd like to see them sign Toni Storm when she's available, and sign Piper Niven, and sign Jazzy Gabbard. No tournaments, no weight limits. Just sign them and put them on NXT. Buy or sell on Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, including their work on the Indies, or The Shield. Who makes for a better team? Buy on The Shield. It's one of the easiest questions that you guys left me here. Buy on The Shield. What will it take for WWE to realize that they can't just care about their hand-shows and favorites like John Cena, Randy Orton, and Roman Reigns? While they may make money short-term on merchandise, they've sacrificed millions of viewers over the last decade plus. What is it going to take for them to go back to what it used to be about, satisfying the fans, long-term booking, and having professional pride in their own product? The honest-to-God answer, and it's kind of funny that I would say this because God knows I complain about enough things, and I still watch because I'm a fan. But if that's how you honestly feel, and you want to know what is it going to take, this is one very simple answer. Stop supporting them. Stop supporting them with your money. Don't buy the network. Don't buy the pay-per-views. Don't buy the t-shirts. Don't buy the DVDs. Don't buy tickets. Don't tune in on Mondays. Don't tune in on Tuesdays. Just stop supporting them. I mean, more so with your money, though. I mean, that's really the only language they speak. So if that's how you honestly feel, that's the best advice that I can give. Would a Hulk Hogan versus Undertaker WrestleMania match have worked back in the early 1990s? Sure. But thank God they didn't. Otherwise, there would have been no streak. Because I guarantee you Hulk Hogan would not have lost to The Undertaker at WrestleMania. I can 100% guarantee you of that. What do you think Sting would have done after the Seth Rollins match had he not gotten injured and had to retire? My personal belief is that he would have won that match and then headlined his Madison Square Garden debut against Seth and dropped the belt back to him then. That's what they should have done. And I think that's exactly what I said on the podcast at the time, that it would not have hurt them as a nice little moment to put the championship on Sting. And then that Madison Square Garden house show, I think, was only maybe a few weeks later, a month later, something like that. It wasn't, that much longer after. He could have dropped the title at MSG and it would have been, twofold. One, you give the fans a cool moment by having Sting win the one title he never won. And you also have a big moment for people who bought money to go see a house show. That would be a major title change to happen on a house show. So there was absolutely no reason for them not to do it. I don't think they would have. I think Seth would have won. But I agree with you 100%. I think that's exactly what they should have done. Do you think Rick Martel's model character could have had a short reign as IC champion? Yeah, absolutely. And Martel, by the way, is another one who I think deserves consideration for the Hall of Fame. What do you think about the idea of Conor McGregor as the special referee for Roman Reigns against Brock Lesnar in the WrestleMania 34 main event? Well, Conor McGregor has to survive that long first. It sounds like he's in a lot of trouble with some mob guys over in Ireland, so I think it's probably best for him to lay low for now. Who do you think could be the top babyface in the Cruiserweight division? With Neville gone, Austin Aries leaving months ago, and Enzo Amore being a heel, that leaves almost no one with much buzz to be the big babyface in that division. I thought of Cedric Alexander if built up well enough, but what are your thoughts? Cedric Alexander needs to get the hell out of that division as quickly as his feet will carry him. Right now, he's the number one contender. He's going to be challenging, as I'm recording this, he's next in line to challenge Enzo for the championship. I don't know if they're going to turn the title onto Cedric or not. I don't think they will. But whether they do or they don't, I don't care as much about him now as much as I did when he was in the Cruiserweight Classic. I actually think he's less, I don't know if less over is the right word, or I just have less interest in the guy since that tournament. And it shouldn't be that way. I could probably say that about most of those guys, to be honest with you, most of the guys in that division. As far as who could be the top babyface, look, I have no doubt that, Ricochet, who apparently is on his way in, he could very capably fill that spot when he comes in. I think Hideo Itami, he could, but it's going to take some time. I mean, as I'm recording this, Itami made his Raw debut last night. I don't think he really looked all that great. He's making his 205 Live debut tonight as I am recording this. So him in that top babyface role, that's a tougher sell. A lot of that's just going to have to do, I think, with how they position him. Is he going to be positioned as this, badass that doesn't speak and he just goes in there and kicks people's heads off and gives him a GTS? Or are they going to try to do, more with him? Have him speak and have him, do comedy or stuff like that, or tell him to tone down the kicks and everything. I don't know. Any of those things I think would be death for Itami. So Itami less so. I think somebody like Ricochet could. The trouble there is I don't want to see him in the cruiserweight division. I'd almost rather Ricochet stay in NXT, be a top star down there, and when they're ready for him and the spot opens up, let's say on Raw or SmackDown, bring him on up to the main roster and let him wrestle with the big boys. If Finn Balor could be wrestling Seth Rollins and Samoa Joe and people like that on TV, there's no reason why Ricochet couldn't be doing the same thing. I've heard Jim Ross say that WWE matches should have time limits. Do you agree or disagree? I agree. Especially for those times where they do announce a time limit. Now, that doesn't happen very often, but every now and then there'll be a match and time expires, or they announce in advance that there's only so much time. And they do that also outside of WWE, but when they do that, it just gives away the fact that the match is going to go to a time limit draw, because when else do they ever announce a time limit, right? They never do. So I think having time limits all the time would eliminate that as being an issue. You wouldn't be spoiling some of those match outcomes. So yeah, I agree. There's no reason not to. Do you think Enzo Amore should try to become a viral star on Twitter or Instagram? He could do silly skits and promos on regular people in character. I feel he has the charisma to connect to young people who don't watch wrestling and can bring more eyes to WWE. Just imagining Enzo cutting a promo on a meter maid calling him soft for giving him a ticket. Well, that sounds like a WWE skit, what you just described. I think something like that would be great on Raw or 205 Live. You also don't just decide to become a viral star. That kind of misses the whole point of going viral. You don't plan for something like that. It just sort of happens naturally. So I think if they want to try doing stuff like that and maybe putting it on their own YouTube channel and just hope it catches fire and hope it goes viral, yeah, I mean, they could try, but it's still going to be seen as a wrestling skit on a wrestling YouTube channel. But I agree. I mean, Enzo has a ton of charisma. I could see Enzo doing other TV shows. I could see Enzo hosting, some kind of show of his own one day. I mean, I find him annoying as shit, so I doubt I would watch, but I also probably wouldn't be in the target audience for something like that. Buy or sell, the Beer City Bruiser or Vader? I love the Beer City Bruiser, but he ain't no Vader. I think he would probably tell you the same thing. So I'm going to buy on Vader. Is Roman Reigns the most controversial wrestler of all time? You must be new here, aren't you? Not even close. Chris Benoit. I actually think Chris Benoit would be considered the most controversial wrestler of all time. Besides WWE programming, 85% of the time, any guilty pleasure TV shows and or movies that you enjoy. I enjoy Night Court reruns as a guilty pleasure. I thought Night Court was a great show. Roseanne was another. I wouldn't be caught dead watching Roseanne when I was younger. But it really was a great show. And they're bringing the original cast back for a reboot. March 27th on ABC. Show's coming back. I think it did get ridiculous towards the end when they hit the lottery. It just changed the whole dynamic of the show. But I'm a big John Goodman fan, so if he's in it, I'll definitely check it out. And I just binged all 3 seasons of Narcos. Great show. Someone lights up a cigarette in every single scene in this show. I wish I was exaggerating when I say that. Pretty sure I'm going to get lung cancer from secondhand smoke just by watching that show. But it's great. I think Steve Austin's heel turn was a terrible move. It made no sense for Austin to go from kicking Vince's ass one week to kissing his ass the very next. Why did Steve go heel? Was it his choice, and do you find it to be a coincidence that he turned heel a week after WCW went under? Perhaps figuring that they no longer have any competition left, and so they could turn one of their top stars heel because, hey, there's nothing left for people to watch. Well, it was Austin's idea. He's admitted as much. He says if he could go back in time and change it, he would win the match exactly the way that he won, but when he goes to shake Vince's hand at the end, he would kick him in the gut and give him a stunner. So buyer's remorse is what Austin has on that heel turn. And actually, and I think it was a stupid move also looking back on it, but I'll play devil's advocate here. It did make sense in this way. You say it didn't make sense. It made sense in this way. If you remember the storyline, if you remember the promo package and the backstage sit-down interview that Austin did with Rock and Jim Ross moderated, the whole story going into this, Austin had just come back months earlier from, 10 months off, I think it was, after neck surgery. He was obsessed with winning back the WWE title. And he would win that championship back at all costs. And I could still remember that final video package that they put, that great video package for the match. And one of the final sound bites was Austin in that interview saying, I need to beat you. He's telling The Rock, I need to beat you more than anything else in life. So storyline-wise, look, everybody has their breaking point. Austin snapped. He was just obsessed with nothing but victory, win at all costs. And if that means having to make friends with my enemy, then so be it. So, storyline-wise, it did make sense. When do you think the starting point was of fans hating Roman Reigns? Okay, so here's the deal. WWE screwed Roman Reigns. Let me just start by saying that. Now, I know that may sound ridiculous given how hard they pushed this guy and the fact that he'll probably be headlining his 4th straight WrestleMania in 2018, right? So people probably thinking, how the hell could you say this? How could they have screwed this man? They did. They screwed him. They completely fucked him over. And it goes back to the Royal Rumble in 2014. By keeping Daniel Bryan out of the Rumble match that year, by the way, they fucked Batista too. But by keeping Bryan out of that match, that set the stage for the rebellion that we saw against Roman the following year. Roman didn't really start getting noticeably booed until the Rumble in 2015. So if you go back to the summer before that, even after Seth Rollins broke up the Shield, he wrestled Orton. Roman did at SummerSlam that year. They had a good match. Then he got the hernia. He got hurt, and he was out for a few months. And that kind of stalled his momentum a bit. And then in their infinite wisdom, Daniel Bryan, who had been out, comes back to TV and he announces that he was entering himself into the 2015 Royal Rumble match. And that right there was the beginning of the end for Roman Reigns as far as this honeymoon period with the fans was concerned. Because even if you had, pockets of people in the weeks before that booing Roman Reigns, he may have been getting some scattered boos here and there. I don't really remember, but even if you had pockets of people booing him before the 2015 Rumble, it didn't really become a thing until after the new year. The worst thing that they could have done, if Bryan wasn't going to win that Rumble match in 2015, the worst thing they could have done was put him in it. It was almost this twisted logic of looking at what they did in 2014 and criticizing them for not having him in the match at all. But then you look at 2015 and the way things worked out, and it's like they put him in the match and we can criticize them for putting him in the match. It was almost like a complete 180. This just weird twisted logic, but it makes sense. If they knew he wasn't going to win, if he wasn't their pick to win and go on to wrestle Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania, then he shouldn't have been in the match. People still had not forgotten what they did the year before. Now you tease them by putting him in the Rumble, and then you eliminate him early in the match after spending what? Maybe he was in there for 5-10 minutes max, if that. Then they send Roman Reigns out there and wish him good luck. It's like, they may as well have taped a sign to the back of his vest that said, "Come at me, bro." You know what I mean? Or kick me. Because that's basically what they did. And that was it. He became the poster child for everything that the fans hated about WWE. All their anger about the Bryan stuff, they projected that onto Roman. It's not anything he did. It wasn't this one horrible match he had or this one horrible promo or he, kicked a baby. He didn't do any one thing that got him booed all of a sudden. They were projecting all of their anger onto him. They blamed him. People by and large still liked the guy at that point, and they screwed it all up. And then Vince McMahon made things worse by personally writing his promos, right? That was a lot of the stories came out at the time. We were wondering, why are Roman Reigns' promos nursery rhymes all of a sudden? Something changed. Why is he out there talking about Jack and the Beanstalk? Why is he out there saying suffering succotash? Like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? And then the stories came out. Well, Vince McMahon has taken it upon himself to write his promos for him. Roman is his little personal pet project, and he's taking a hands-on approach. That is the worst thing that you could possibly do. So if they weren't so hell-bent on pushing the guy, you would almost think they were trying to sabotage him. And I don't think he's ever fully recovered from that. This Shield reunion that they've been doing, which has mostly been a bust so far because Roman got the mumps. Now Dean Ambrose is hurt. Not sure how long he'll be out for. He's got this elbow injury. But it was very transparent from the beginning, the whole purpose of the Shield reunion, why they were doing it. It was smart. I give them a lot of credit. I wanted to see them back together. I'm a big Shield fan from back in the day. I enjoyed, all those 6-man matches. But, there was never going to be any chance in hell of him not being booed out of the Superdome next year at WrestleMania. But, hey, for the time being, it was working. In most cities, it was working. It was smart to get them to try to get people to cheer for Reigns by putting those 3 guys back together. And I think on most weeks, when the Shield is out there and they come through the crowd and all that, he gets a pretty good reaction. Gets more cheers than boos. But that's never going to fully go away. It never went away with John Cena, and it's never going to go away with Roman Reigns. And you know what? I don't blame him. I don't blame Daniel Bryan. I blame WWE. And their handling of that whole situation. They did Roman no favors. Do you think WWE should get rid of 205 Live and put the Cruiserweight division and the Cruiserweight title on NXT? Well, speaking of 205 Live, they're doing the first 205 Live house shows next month, as many of you know. They announced this after just having put out a survey asking people, why you no watch 205 Live? They want to know why the fans are not even watching the show. So, hey, let's start house shows. And now I see they're adding Bray Wyatt against Matt Hardy. Ticket sales must be real slow. Already they're adding the non-cruiserweight attractions here to try to jazz up these cards. That's usually not a good sign. But those ECW house shows, if you think back to the late 2000s when they were doing their version of ECW, they started ECW brand house shows. That didn't last very long. And I doubt that this experiment is going to last very long either. It's very tough to headline with guys who are not positioned as headliners on TV. It's one thing to keep people in the building, when SmackDown ends. It's another thing to get people to pay to go see 205 Live stars. And they're running smaller venues, which they have to. But I still don't think, even with the WWE brand name, I think it's going to be an uphill climb to get people to pay to see a show headlined by Enzo Amore against, Mustafa Ali. But anyway, I would like to see the Cruiserweight guys, at least some of them, on NXT anyway. But it's frustrating because, you have 3 hours of Raw. There is a place on the show for these guys, just not in the way that they're using them right now. I really do think that Eric Bischoff had the right formula back 20 years ago. The way he used the Cruiserweight talent on Nitro, opening the show with a hot match and then building one program for the title that you could feature elsewhere on the show, an hour or two or whatever. That was the way to go. I mean, them limiting what these guys can do in the ring, which clearly they're toned down. I mean, go watch the Cruiserweight Classic and watch, the Cruiserweight division over the course of a few weeks. There are some really, good matches that these guys go out there and have, but it's very obvious that their style is very different. Watching them on the main roster is very different than it would be watching them in that tournament. It's very different than it would be watching them outside of WWE. It's very apparent that they have been told to tone things down. Or, hey, let's incorporate chin locks and headlocks and rest holds. And that's not what people want to see with the cruiserweights. I don't want to see the cruiserweights doing the same shit that everybody else on the roster would do. I mean, that's not my idea of fun. That's not what I was hoping for when they brought these guys back. If that's all that their vision is going to be of the cruiserweight division, then yeah, it might be best to just take these guys and, put them in other places, whether it's other places on the show or in NXT or wherever. But when I could watch big guys doing a lot of what these guys are doing. It's really not all that unique. And part of it also, I think, is just that it was a different time back then. In 96, 97, 98, cruiserweight stuff in this country on mainstream television. I mean, I'm sure people who lived in Mexico, Lucha Libre, they were seeing these guys all the time. But I had never seen matches like that in my life when I was watching the cruiserweights on Nitro. I would flip back and forth. Wasn't a big WCW fan, but I would watch them. 20 years later, everybody is doing dives, and I make fun of it all the time. Everybody does dives in WWE. Luke Harper used to do dive. Now he's doing the Bludgeon Brothers thing, but Luke Harper would do dives. The Usos do dives. The New Day, they do trust dives. Charlotte's doing moonsaults off the top rope to the floor, for God's sakes. Like, they're stealing the thunder away from these smaller guys who are like, hey, what are you doing here? This is all I got, Like, leave me something at least. So when the bigger, stars start doing all the high-flying stuff, it makes it harder for the smaller guys to stand out. And I think also that's just a problem that they can't really fix. That's just a product of the style evolving or devolving, depending on how you look at it. And there's not a whole lot they can do about that. Could The Miz have another world title run, or is he destined to stay in the mid-card? I think he could, but on SmackDown, not on Raw. If Bret Hart had remained healthy during his time in WCW and never received the career-ending kick from Bill Goldberg, do you think Bret would have returned to WWE after the buyout? And if so, how long would his career have continued on for? I don't know. I mean, that's impossible to know. It depends on injury. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different factors involved there. Would he have come back to WWE after the buyout? Yeah, I think he would have. Absolutely. Now, if you're saying Montreal would have still happened, but he would have been healthy enough to come back and wrestle, I still think he would have come back. I mean, he used to talk about, and this might have been after his stroke, but he admitted that he would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, like in a cold sweat. He would have wrestling dreams because that's all he ever knew. I mean, it was his whole life, his whole family was wrestling. So he would have these dreams about being in the ring with Kurt Angle. And they were in the middle of a move or a sequence, and it felt so real to him. But then he would wake up and he would be all depressed because he knew he could never wrestle Kurt. He could never wrestle all of these newer guys. And that was so sad, really, when I heard him tell that story. There's not a doubt in my mind that whatever happened in Montreal, which eventually he put behind him anyway, he would have put it behind himself a lot sooner, and he would have come in and he would have worked with a lot of those guys. Absolutely. Let's see here. Do you think Raw and SmackDown would be better if they were an hour long each week? Oh, absolutely. You kidding me? With commercials, it'd be more like 46 minutes. Sounds good to me. Would you be willing to do a top 10 worst WCW pay-per-views or worst WCW matches countdown? I already did a top 15 countdown of the best WCW matches in history. You could find a lot of the clips, I think, here on Trax's channel. I suggest you go check those out. Lots of great matches on that list. I even had DDP on my show the first time to talk about his match against Goldberg at Halloween Havoc 98, which is one of the great WCW title matches from back in the day. I had more fun talking about those matches than all of the bad stuff from WCW. So in this case, I would say focus on the good, leave the bad alone. I think all the bad WCW stuff has just been beaten to death. But definitely check out those matches from my countdown. Do you think JBL is truly a legend, worthy of the Hall of Fame? Do you think Jinder Mahal will end up as a reliable main eventer? He is, after all, the 50th WWE Champion, so there has to be something great about him for WWE to give him that honor. No, I I would not say that they saw something great in him and that's why they put the championship on him. They saw it as an opportunity. They were being very opportunistic in putting the championship on him. They were trying to break into a new market, and they had this vision in their head that this was somehow going to be helpful to them. And of course, here we are now 6-7 months later as I'm recording this. Jinder just lost the championship about a month ago. And I doubt that their grand plan when they started this big push in the spring was to just have him drop the championship on TV and, excommunicate him from the main event of Survivor Series and then beat him again the next month and have Triple H beat him in India, the one India date that they did. I refuse to believe that was their plan all along. It just didn't work out. I don't think they saw any noticeable uptick or business difference, I should say, in business when it comes to India, or would have heard about it by now. They would have put out 5 press releases telling us all these great metrics and all these great numbers that are up in India, and that just hasn't happened. And Jinder did the best he could. I mean, I'm so tired of talking about this because I've answered this question so many times about him, but yeah, he worked hard. He completely transformed his body. How he did that is his business. I think we can kind of, see what's going on here. But whatever, he changed his body. He changed his look. He had the Singh brothers added as part of his act. I think that they make for a great act somewhere on the show. That place is not the main event. But don't have this idea that, well, they put the title on him because they saw something in him. Like they're going to build around him and they see him long term as being a main eventer. It was an experiment. It didn't work. I don't think anyway. It didn't work. And what are you going to do? They tried pushing someone quote unquote new, even though he wasn't really all that new. And maybe if they didn't spend all those years kind of drilling it into our heads that this is not somebody to be taken seriously, maybe we would have had a different perspective on this guy, but that's not the way it worked out. And now he's no longer the champion. As far as JBL is concerned, and by the way, just to go back to that question, do I see Jinder as being a reliable main eventer in the future? I don't. And I think now we're going to start to see him settle back into that middle of the card role that he probably should have started out in when they started pushing him all those months ago. As far as JBL, is he worthy of the Hall of Fame? By WWE standards, sure. I mean, they put people in the Hall of Fame who have spent far less time in the company than him and have been far less influential. I know they like to credit him with creating the whole tribute to the troops concept, and they're still doing those shows every single year. He was just back. They just brought him back to do commentary for the most recent one. But he was WWE champion for a while. And Intercontinental champion, tag team champion. He had the APA stuff. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, whatever your thoughts may be about JBL, if he's blocked you on Twitter, if he may be a dick, all of that may be true. But yeah, he belongs in the Hall of Fame. How do you think Magnum TA's career would have played out if he never had his accident? Well, I think he would have been a headliner, easily. I think most people from that era who worked with him and knew him have said the same thing. I think Dusty has said that. I think Flair said that. I think he probably would have become the NWA champion. It's not a guarantee, but I think at some point he probably would have won the NWA title. Probably around 87, 88-ish, somewhere around there. I think it still would have been Flair and Dusty at the Starrcade show in 86. So I don't think his accident would have changed that, but he absolutely would have been NWA champion, probably would have ended up in WWE at some point too. Everybody did. Even Sting. Just took him a little bit longer. It took him a little bit longer than most, but, a lot of those top guys, even Dusty. And I think at that point, in 86, 87, it probably would have been unfathomable to think that he would have gone to work for Vince. But even he went. So at some point, we probably would have seen Magnum in WWE. Buy or sell on the tag team that had the most potential before their run was cut short. Chris Jericho and Edge from 2009 or Daniel Bryan and CM Punk from late 2013. I don't even remember Punk and Bryan being a thing. But even if I did, the answer is still Jericho and Edge. They won the titles. They didn't have time to do a damn thing after that. I think they would have been a very entertaining team together had Edge not gotten hurt. On the other hand, on the upside here, on the flip side, it did give us Jericho, which was also a great tag team. Could a WWE New Japan partnership work? We've seen in just the past year, New Japan work with Ring of Honor, CMLL, Rev Pro, and Noah. But could WWE down the road, post-Vince, be open to a super show? Look, when Vince is out of the picture, and that could not be for another 20 or 30 years for all we know, or it could be next year. It's impossible to know when Vince will be out of the picture or when he will start to really hand the reins over to Triple H and Stephanie. But when that happens, all bets are off. We've seen Triple H do things in NXT that Vince never would have done in a million years. Triple H is the one who's forming all these relationships with, Gabe Sapolsky and Evolve and what's the other promotion over in the UK? Their name just popped out of my head. Oh boy. they're the name of the company just popped out of my head. But he's forging all of these partnerships that for WWE to be doing this, you think back even 5 years ago, never in a million years. Never in a million years. The closest thing I could think of is when they actually reached an agreement with TNA to have Ric Flair come in and do the Hall of Fame. And so in exchange, they sent Christian, who, poor guy, he looked like a hostage. They sent him to one of the, it might have been Bound for Glory, one of the TNA pay-per-views, just to make a very quick cameo. And that maybe is like the closest thing in the last decade that I could think of in terms of Vince forging some kind of a deal with another company. It's just not in his DNA. Maybe once upon a time it was. I know in the early 90s, WWF had a working relationship. I think, what was it, SWS? Some promotion over in Japan. And even in the 80s, I think there was some, working relationship with other promotions. But as Vince got stronger and his company got bigger and bigger and he didn't have to work with people, he didn't want to work with anybody. He had his developmental stuff with OVW and they kind of did their own thing and they didn't commingle with anybody else. But Triple H, he's a different kind of beast. I think Triple H would be a lot more open to stuff. Could we see a partnership with New Japan? I think if it's mutually beneficial and Vince is out of the picture and New Japan is open to it, then yeah, I think it's absolutely possible that at some point we could see WWE and New Japan. I don't know if that comes in the form of a talent exchange. You're talking about a super show. I think a super show is a lot less likely. But as far as just having an open relationship, I think at that point it would be a possibility. But until Triple H, kind of gets in the catbird seat, it's impossible to know. Has there ever been a time when TNA was good? If so, what was their best year? Absolutely. There were lots of times TNA was good, even great. A lot of people would say those early years, like 2004, 2005, were some of the best because the focus was on the X Division. I know a lot of people rave about that triple threat from 2005 with AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, and Samoa Joe. I think that was the Unbreakable match. Some say that was TNA's best match ever. Me personally, I think 2012 was their best year overall. And this is despite the debut of Brooke Hogan and Aces and Eights and the Claire Lynch angle, right? Becky's evil sister. Despite all of that garbage, I still say 2012, in my opinion, was TNA's best year. And we should never, ever forget Claire Lynch. Let that name never leave our minds. We should always remember that atrocity. But remember, the infamous Katie Vick angle happened in 2002. And I still look at 2002 as one of WWE's better years, even in spite of that. So it is possible to have an angle so ungodly horrible and yet end up having a great year in spite of it. We had Bobby Roode as the TNA champion at the peak of his run in that company. We had the debut of Joseph Park Esquire. I absolutely loved that character when it first debuted. Call it a guilty pleasure, but I liked it. I just remember really digging their TV show week to week, and they put together some great pay-per-views that year. I was reviewing Impact on my show consistently every single week for the first time in forever. So yeah, I mean, there was a time, believe it or not, when TNA was good. Look, there are people who say it's good now. You just don't hear about it because nobody's watching. There is no buzz around the show at all. One thing I never understood regarding the career of The Undertaker, given his advancing age and physical capabilities, was why he was expected to give high-quality matches and, quote, steal the show so many years past his prime. Well, Undertaker is a weird case. He is a rare example of a guy who actually seemed to get better the older he got. From a match quality standpoint, doing more than just choke, zombie sit-up, choke, 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 tombstone, which is all he did for the first, 4 or 5 years of his run. And then I would say from, 96 onward, really starting with the Mankind feud, the character and, him as a performer, he started to evolve. I think less so in 98 and 99. I don't remember any matches from his run in 99 as Ministry Undertaker that I would consider to be really good or worth going back to watch. Other than, I will say one. The first blood match he had with Austin at Fully Loaded in 99, that was a really good match. I remember liking that match a lot. But as far as WrestleMania goes, look at some of the guys he had to work with early on, for God's sakes. Jimmy Snuka. And not Jimmy Snuka at peak Snuka, which probably would have been late 70s, 80, 81, 82. This was past his prime Snuka. Giant Gonzalez, for God's sakes, King Kong Bundy, Psycho Sid. Those were terrible matches. Awful. Diesel, he actually had a good match with Diesel, I thought, at 12, but those other matches were absolutely terrible, and he just did not have a lot to work with. Randy Orton, Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Edge. You know what? I would say those names beat the hell out of some of those other stiffs he was working with in the mid-90s. So it leaves me to wonder, how good would he have been in ring during those early years if he was allowed to wrestle the same way he was a decade later? But it was just, it was just a different time. It wasn't about match quality in WWE. It's just not what it was about. It was about characters. And when that stopped working, and the steroid stuff obviously had a lot to do with this, Vince started pushing guys like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, who were smaller, but they could also work circles around a lot of those other guys. Undertaker was one of those rare big men who could keep up. And so as the years went on, he got more and more beat up. But people started noticing all of a sudden his matches. They started noticing his actual wrestling matches a lot more. So I think people start to have certain expectations, not realizing, hey, this guy's almost 50 years old. Now, by now he's over 50. But I think you go back and they're starting to realize all those years ago, this guy's almost 50. He's almost 7 feet tall, which means by now his knees are probably totally shot. Or in his case, it's his hips that are shot. I remember reading one of the newsletters in 98, I want to say, where there was an item in one of the newsletters where the doctors were telling Undertaker he would need to have at least one, if not both hips replaced in the next couple of years. And this was in 1998. It's incredible, the body of work that this guy put together in the second half of his career. That it was better than most of what he did in the first half. But at some point, Father Time catches up with you. It's finally caught up with The Undertaker. And I'm just hoping, as I said earlier, that they let WrestleMania 33 be his retirement. But he's already been announced for that 25th anniversary of Raw show at the end of next month. And that being so close to WrestleMania, boy, what a cock tease that'll be, right? To bring back The Undertaker so close to Mania and not have him announce something or be involved in something. So I would be shocked if they don't set up a match for him at Mania next year. What was the most embarrassing moment you've ever seen at a WrestleMania, be it live or on TV? Most embarrassing moment. I've been to a lot of WrestleManias. Only since 28, which is kind of weird. I've been a fan my whole life, and I didn't actually go to my first Mania until 28 in Miami. But I would say most embarrassing moment comes from one of those live shows that I went to. I would say, and a lot of you probably wouldn't even know this because this didn't happen on camera, but it was WrestleMania 32 in Dallas. Again, this did not air on TV, but when the Hall of Fame segment was over, watching Howard Finkel try to get out of the ring as a big fan of his. I'm a big fan of Howard Finkel, and I thought it was a shame they took him off TV as early as they did. But watching him have to be assisted to try to get out of the ring was just so sad. It was incredibly sad. Now, I don't know what happened. All I remember is seeing a whole bunch of people trying to help him out of the ring to get out. It looked like he got stuck. He was not climbing through the ropes. He sat down and he was trying to kind of roll out of the ring, I think, under the bottom rope, and it looked like he got stuck. I don't know. I remember watching that and just feeling just so bad for the guy, and they didn't even have him do introductions for the Hall of Fame segment at WrestleMania this year. I can see why. This year's show in Orlando was the first WrestleMania out of all 33 WrestleManias that Howard Finkel did not appear on. There was another streak that ended this year and almost nobody noticed. But yeah, they left him off the show this year. I mean, I don't see why they couldn't have just had him on the microphone backstage doing the announcements if they're so worried about his appearance. But I mean, after seeing what I saw at 32, I wasn't really surprised when I saw that they didn't bring him out at 33 this year. Plus, that ramp to the ring this year, are you kidding me? What was it, like 80 yards, I think? There's no way he was getting to the ring anyway. Considering WWE is trying to push the whole women's revolution by giving them a tournament, a Money in the Bank match, and more, do you think they will eventually give them their own show on the network? Sure, yeah, I think it's inevitable. I mean, I enjoyed the Mae Young Classic. The Mae Young Classic proved that I think a women's show can work. But you know what? I said the same thing about the Cruiserweights. I said the same thing. The Cruiserweight Classic. It was this great tournament. And now I'm really bullish on the idea of, man, they're going to, you know, I'd love to see the Cruiserweight division now, man. If it's going to be like this is going to be awesome. And here we are over a year later. And you could say a lot of things about the Cruiserweight division. And there are weeks where they'll, you know, churn out a great match. And I am entertained by some of the personalities in that division. But boy, awesome and excited and cool and all those things is not something I would say about the Cruiserweight division now. I said it about the tournament last year. I would not say the same thing about that division now. And I fear that it would be the same thing with the women. I thought the Mae Young Classic was really good. I think I like the Cruiserweight one more. But I thought when that tournament was over and I looked back, I was like, this was a really good tournament. And it makes you think, well, hey, if they can replicate that and they want to turn it into a 1-hour show on the network, then great, go for it. But here we go again, right? The problem is that can we trust them to do with the women or do right by the women, I think the way that they did with the Mae Young Classic? The answer is no. Because if they just turn around and do what they do on television every single week, I don't know how much of an audience, honestly, there's going to be for that. But I think it's worth trying at some point, and I think they will. I can't say when, but do I think it could work? Yeah, but they got to make it interesting. I'm pretty bored right now with what they're doing with the women, especially on SmackDown. If it's just going to be another hour of that, then you can count me out. It's just a matter of coming up with the right formula for the show. That's really what it boils down to. I don't want to see an extension, just a pure extension of what I see on TV every single week. There has to be something about the show that differentiates itself from Raw and SmackDown. NXT is enough of a different show every week. Look, there are weeks where it's boring as all hell, but most weeks, when the hour is over, it's not too long, and what they give us, I enjoy it. I still enjoy NXT. All they have to do is follow that formula, make it different enough from what we see on the main roster, and find the right formula. And I think it could work. If Bret Hart had stayed for the Attitude Era, what do you think his role would have been? His feud with Shawn Michaels would have come to an end with Michaels being out for 4 years, so what does he do next? I think that if Bret stays, he feuds with Steve Austin for a while longer. I think he works with The Rock. I don't think Owen Hart joins the Nation of Domination. I think Bulldog stay. Oh, obviously Bulldog is going to stay. So you figure those three stay together as a trio. You know, you keep the Hart Foundation alive for a little bit longer. Probably feud with DX. Beyond that, I don't know. A lot of it depends on how much longer Bret wanted to go full time. You know, he took a good part of the year off in '96. Maybe he takes another sabbatical like that, you know? I don't know. Best entrance music, vocal or non-vocal, what do you choose? Real American. Real American is my all-time favorite wrestling theme song. What petty things has WWE done that made you disgusted by them? There's not enough hours in the day for me to answer that question. Too many. That's my answer. Do you think Greg the Hammer Valentine's promos on Junkyard Dog were racist? Yes, they were. Of course. They were designed to be that way. It's just a different time. You can't imagine those promos happening now. I think the company would be shut down if they tried to do promos like that now. When you call your opponent a nasty black man and you tell him to shine your shoes and you call him boy over and over again, you're cutting a racist promo. Like, don't let anybody tell you any different. Oh, maybe it wasn't a racist promo. Of course it was. That was the whole point. He's using the man's race to get heat. That is the very definition of a racist promo. When you talked about Hulk Hogan's leaked WCW contract, you mentioned Hogan possibly jumping back to WWE in June of 1998. Let's say he did not sign or re-sign with WCW. Would he have been brought back as a babyface, or would WWE continue his heel run? Good question. He would have come over alone, not with Hall and Nash. So, they couldn't do the NWO thing like they did when they came back in '02. I think it would have been very easy to bring him back just in the red and yellow, but I think it would have been a huge mistake. Steve Austin was first taking off that year. I think bringing back Hogan as the babyface would have cut Austin's legs off right when he was in the middle of his first big run as champion. That would have been a big, big mistake. I think you bring him in as the cocky heel. Bring him in as Hollywood. Calling himself the biggest star in the history of the business, and you set the stage for a Hogan-Austin mega match. Now, ideally, you would do that at WrestleMania. But if he came in, let's say, around June or July of 98, and just for some context here, if I'm remembering correctly, this was one of Hogan's negotiating ploys. There were rumors, dirt sheet rumors back then in the summer of 98 that Hogan was possibly thinking about jumping back to Vince. And it turned out just to be a negotiating ploy, and he got exactly what he wanted out of WCW, so good for him. But there was talk, there was chatter at that time that he might just come back. Obviously, he did not. But if he would have, that would have been in the summer. It would have been hard, I think, not to, do that match in Madison Square Garden that year as the SummerSlam main event. Now, just imagine that, though. Imagine that Highway to Hell build-up for SummerSlam that year, that Highway to Hell build-up to a match at MSG between Hogan and Austin. That would have been unreal. Now, they would be rushing the match by doing it a month or two after Hogan comes in, but Hogan came back in February of '02, and a month later they did the match with Rocky at WrestleMania. So you know what? Sometimes you got to strike when the iron's hot. Would the Montreal Screwjob have played out the same if Bret Hart was the Intercontinental Champion on his way to WCW as opposed to the WWF Champion? Well, that is an interesting question. I think of all the Montreal questions I've ever been sent over the years, that is a new one. That is a new twist on it. I don't think so. No. I think the issue was Vince did not want his top champion. He did not want his world champion to walk into WCW with the title. That title was the crown jewel of his company. It meant more then than it does now. It's kind of ridiculous to even think about something like that happening today, as insignificant as all of the titles are these days. The idea that whole Montreal thing, just, again, the idea of it even happening now, the way it happened then, and all the drama around the championship, it's just preposterous to even think of something like that happening now. But the titles back then, they actually, meant something in the way that he looked at it. At the time, it would have been death for his company if their champion would have taken that title and walked into WCW, which Bret wasn't going to do. So, Vince is full of shit if that's his argument. But no, I mean, I think they would have figured something else out. If Bret was the Intercontinental Champion, it wouldn't have been as big of a deal. I don't think Vince would have screwed Bret over the way he did over the IC title, put it that way. He did what he had to do because Bret was his top guy. That's a different story. And where you come down on the argument, everybody has an opinion on that. But believe me, he's not going to go through all of the drama and all of that stuff to screw the guy over a secondary title. I just don't see that happening. Let's see. 2019 is the year WWE's contract ends with NBC Universal and could lead to them leaving USA Network. If USA decides to part ways with WWE, do you think they might give that time slot to other promotions like Ring of Honor, New Japan, or others? No, I don't think so. They like WWE because they bring them some of the highest ratings on the entire network, and they keep them in the top 20 listing every single week, I think, of all the cable channels. If WWE leaves, they have no need for wrestling anymore. There is no other wrestling company that can bring them that kind of audience. There just isn't. And really, it's not wrestling drawing those numbers on USA. It's WWE. WWE is an established brand. They have a core fan base. No matter how shit the shows have been over the last 5 years, they never did dip below a certain level. They can always rely on this solid base of around 2.5 million or so that are always going to tune into their show no matter how god-awful it may be. Now, New Japan is doing well on access, according to Mark Cuban, but they also don't release Nielsen data. We have no idea exactly how well they're doing. We can't measure it. We have to take his word for it. So we have no way of knowing what that means. My guess is it's still a very low number. Ring of Honor, Lucha Underground, these are all unproven on cable. And I like Lucha Underground a lot, but the fact is the ratings just weren't there. Now, they were also on El Rey, and El Rey doesn't have the kind of audience that USA does, but I don't believe that if Lucha Underground ended up on USA that they're going to just automatically start doing 2.5 million people. It's not going to happen. There's a reason that Jeff Jarrett and all these other people who are always trying to get the next big TV deal, oh, it's coming, we're having meetings, we're having discussions, and then guess what? It never comes. There's a reason for that. They try and try and try and try, and they hope, and they hope, and they hope, and they hope, and it never happens. Because if wrestling was that hot, every network would have a wrestling show. Every network would be after Jeff Jarrett and Vince McMahon. They would be lined up outside his office, and they're not. And there's a reason for that. I figure you had a Sega Genesis growing up. What is your favorite Sonic the Hedgehog game and favorite Sega Genesis game? Favorite Sonic game is Sonic 2. And favorite Genesis game, probably Mortal Kombat 2. Mortal Kombat 2 was an awesome game. I'm a sucker for sequels. What can I say? Who do you think will induct the Hardy Boys when they eventually go into the Hall of Fame? Lita or someone else? I don't think it's going to be Lita. I'll put my money down right now that Lita will not be the one inducting the Hardys into the Hall of Fame. I would say probably Michael Hayes. Michael Hayes. Yeah, he managed them early in their career. I think they credit him with being a big help. He was a big influence on them. So, yeah, I would say either Hayes or one of the more modern tag teams. They do that sometimes where they'll have just like a current team say, oh, the Hardys, we, idolize them and we looked up to them and we are so honored to be able to induct them into the Hall of Fame. So that's the way I think they'll go. I think it'll either be Michael Hayes or a current tag team. Maybe they can get the Young Bucks. I've been watching some old WCW pay-per-views from 2000 and 2001 and wanted your opinion on the New Blood angle and the confusing last few months of WCW aside from Scott Steiner's reign. The storylines were all over the place. What can you tell me about that? I'll be honest with you, I wasn't paying too much attention to WCW in those final few months because the stuff leading up to it was so awful, it was so dreadful. I was never a big WCW fan to begin with, so I sure as hell wasn't going to waste my time watching them twitch like a dying corpse. I knew what was going on. I read up on it. I would flip when Nitro was on with Raw. Less so in 2000 and 2001, but I still flipped. I saw some of it, but I just had no interest. So the whole New Blood versus Millionaires Club concept, it sounded kind of cool on paper. The younger guys against the older grizzled vets, but the product was just so bad. It was so bad. And to see a company go from where they were in 97 to where they were in 2001 is just so fucking depressing to think about. And I know anybody listening to this right now who was a fan back then, if you were a teenager, you lived through the Monday Night Wars, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Think back, when you think back to WCW at its peak, okay, and all the stars they had, and Nitro every week, how exciting it usually was, and all the stars they had and the money they were making, and Sting and Goldberg and DDP becoming a big star, and Booker T and all these people. You think back to WCW then and where they were then in 2001, it is the most depressing thing in the world. It's awful. If you're a wrestling fan, one of the worst things, if not the worst thing that ever happened to the wrestling business was the death of WCW. Regarding the Radicals, Benoit and Eddie would go on to become world champions, but Saturn and Malenko were not so lucky. Do you think WWE misused them? And if so, how would you have booked them? I think you could have done more with Malenko. He was doing the light heavyweight stuff. But no, look, honestly, I don't think WWE could have done much with either one of those guys. I mean, I've heard people say Saturn was severely underused and he was very talented. Yeah, I'm sure he was, but I never looked at Perry Saturn in WCW or WWE as being, a guy that was going to go on to be, let's say, at the level that Benoit and Eddie were. I just never saw him that way. So I think, could they have done more with them? Yeah, of course. But I think things settled exactly where they were going to settle. Dean Malenko was just not going to be a top guy. He was not top guy material. And Perry Saturn, you could argue he was, but in WWE, he was never going to be a top guy. Simple as that. What is the most significant change you have seen in the world in the last 10 years? A deep philosophical question here. Easiest answer I can give you, technology, social media. First iPhone came out 10 years ago. That pretty much changed the game, you know? Even if you're not an Apple fan, you know, you have to go back to that moment when the iPhone, the first one came out. That changed everything as far as smartphones. And I mean, I had a BlackBerry. I didn't have an iPhone until many years later. But that really did change the game. And also, you know, they opened up Facebook to everybody, and Twitter blew up, and Instagram and Snapchat, all these different tech innovations, all these different things that happen in the tech space, to me, is the biggest thing to happen in this world. I mean, you know how many people get their news now just from Facebook and Twitter? It's terrifying. Absolutely. And I get news too from Twitter sometimes, but the fact that there are people who get their news only from Facebook and Twitter is just absolutely horrifying to me. Who would you have be the top guy, or be the guy, I should say, to beat Brock Lesnar for the Universal title at WrestleMania, excluding Roman Reigns? Easiest answer I can give you is Braun Strowman. I was really looking over the Raw and SmackDown roster the other day. I don't even remember what I was looking at them for, but I was looking at the roster for something, and I'm looking at them and I'm like, yeah, you know, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of talented guys on here, but who do you build a company around? This is the problem. There is nobody that really just jumps out at me. Braun is the closest thing, because Braun is a guy who has gotten over, and he actually has fan support, and I think he's improved a ton in the last couple of years since he first came on the scene, and he's getting better and better, and he still is. He's that kind of that holdover from a past era of this larger-than-life, physically imposing, big, tall, jacked-up dude. You don't see too many of them anymore. You do see a lot of smaller guys in WWE, so I think he stands out more. Now, if Braun Strowman came along in the era of the Giants, and he was in the company when Earthquake was there, and Typhoon, and Big John Studd, and Andre, yeah, he wasn't going to stand out as much. Although I think he would have done pretty well as, you know, like a villain for Hogan. You know, he could have had a good run with Hogan, I think. But Braun Strowman is the name that comes to mind. I thought their match at No Mercy, him and Lesnar, was very disappointing, but I don't lay all of that at Braun's feet. Lesnar has to deliver. Brock has to do his part. Maybe you do it at WrestleMania and make it no holds barred, so that way they can brawl outside the ring too. But now they're wrestling at the Royal Rumble. Of course, Kane is involved, which is ridiculous, but he'll eat the fall, I'm sure. So obviously, if these two were going to fight at WrestleMania, I would not have them fighting at the Royal Rumble, so this is all a moot point. Buy or sell, Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit at Royal Rumble 2003, or Kurt Angle versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 21. I have to go back and watch that Rumble match again. I haven't watched it in a long time, but my gut reaction is to buy on Angle and Shawn from WrestleMania. Another buy or sell, Brock Lesnar's 2014 title reign or his current Universal title run. I'm going to buy on his current run, and I know a lot of you are going to disagree with me on that. He never shows up. We have no champion. We have an absentee champion. All of that is true, but all of that was true in 2014 as well. I'm going to buy in his current run because he's had fresher opponents. We've seen him against Samoa Joe, Braun Strowman, AJ Styles. If you think back to 2014, who'd he beat? He beat John Cena. Then he beat John Cena. He wrestled John Cena again. And then I don't think we saw him again until the Rumble. And he wrestled John Cena again. At least then they had Seth Rollins in there and they had a great match. So at least this time he's mixed it up with more names. He's been more open, I guess, to getting in there with guys other than John Cena. So, yeah, I would buy on the current run over the one from 2014. What did you think of the Ministry of Darkness? Did you like it? Nope. Didn't like it. Not my thing. I thought the music was cool. That was about the only part of it I liked, but I just wasn't a fan. Would Brian Pillman have gained top card success had he not died? No, I don't think his health would have allowed it. I think he had the Humvee wreck. He had his ankle fused. Apparently he was on pain pills. He was in agony all the time. So that version of Brian Pillman would not have been able, I think, he wouldn't have been able to be a top guy. Now, had he not had that Humvee wreck, and he ended up coming to WWE anyway, at the same time that Steve Austin was on the rise, then yes, absolutely. I've said it many times before that if he could physically go, I believe he would have been Steve Austin's first challenger for the WWF title coming out of WrestleMania 14, and that would not have been Dude Love. That would have been Brian Pillman's spot. Any recommendations for wrestling shows to binge on the network? I've been a wrestling fan since last year, and I'm looking for shows, old and new, to watch. I was thinking of watching a specific year of wrestling. Well, in that case, I would suggest you start out with 1997, and then go watch 2000, WWE, two of its best years. Who do you think should never go to WWE? That was the question. That was this person's question. Who should never go? I think guys like Tanahashi and Okada in New Japan. I think those two are the lifeblood of that promotion, and I think that they should retire there. The Raw match between John Cena and Shawn Michaels in April of 2007 is considered to be one of the greatest Raw matches of all time. Before that, they advertised Randy Orton versus Edge for later that same night. Was that match ever going to take place, or was it just misleading advertising? I've wondered if the Cena-Michaels match was meant to go that long, and they just realized how special it was turning into, and so they let them keep going, and they canceled the Orton-Edge match. There never was going to be an Orton-Edge match. They only did that to make the Cena-Michaels match going an hour long feel more spontaneous. Orton wasn't even there that night. Now, if you remember, that was in the UK. They were on tour. That night, Raw was in the UK. Orton, I remember it well, he had a fight with a hotel room, and the hotel room lost. I think he did about $50,000 of damage in that hotel room, and so they sent him home early from the tour. I thought it was actually really smart of them to do what they did, because the problem when you do like an Iron Man match, which this wasn't an Iron Man match per se, although it almost went an hour long, and my voice is going, I apologize, but when you do an Iron Man match, the issue is always that you're telling people, okay, look, the really fun stuff, like the really exciting stuff, it ain't going to come until the last 5-10 minutes, so you don't even really have to pay attention. That's the trouble with announcing in advance that you're going to go 60 minutes. By announcing more matches for later in the show, it was very smart. It's a smart way to keep people tuned in all the way through what ended up being, I think it was like a 55-minute match, maybe. I think it was. So it was actually a very smart tactic on their part. Who was the biggest second-generation flop in wrestling? Second-generation flop? Well, I mean, considering who their fathers were, I would go with either David Flair, he's the obvious one, or David Sammartino. I think either way, the answer is David. David is my answer. What was your favorite Shield 6-man tag team match? God, they had so many of them on TV every week. They sort of blend together. I would go with their match with the Wyatt family from Elimination Chamber 2014. I love that match. Say you're a new addition to Lucha Underground and they give you creative freedom. What sort of character would you portray? This was one of the more interesting questions that I was sent. I was thinking about this before. What sort of character would I portray? Well, I would not be a wrestler, I could tell you that. And anybody who's met me before, you could tell I would not be a wrestler. I think, and this is my idea here. I haven't had a lot of time to map this out, but I would play an evil podcaster who interviews the talent before the shows and sort of stirs up shit between them. Like, remember Just Joe in WWE? He was like the big shit stirrer in the back. He would spread rumors. Hey, this guy said this about you. That would be me. I would be like Just Joe. Just Jason in Lucha Underground. That would be me. Like, I would tell Katrina, let's say if I'm interviewing Katrina, and I would tell her, like, hey, Evilise has been going around spreading lies about you and talking about how much you smell, or, something like that. But here's the twist, right? So I'm an evil podcaster. The podcast, though, would be a front. That's all. The podcast would just be a front for all of the illegal drug trafficking that I would be doing out of the temple in Boyle Heights. And I would be the guy selling Dario Cueto all of his coke. That would be me. I think that could work. I think that would be a hell of a character. Would you ever do a meet and greet with people who listen to your show? I've done many meetups. I've done them all over the place. New Orleans, Dallas, Orlando. I've done a couple of them here in Brooklyn. I am sure I'm going to be doing another one. If not a live show, I'll be doing at least a meetup in New Orleans for WrestleMania in a few months. So drop on by if you're in town. I love getting as many people out as I can. There's no tickets. I don't charge people. There's no cover at the door or anything like that. We pick a place. People show up. and they shoot the shit with a bunch of like-minded wrestling fans. So if you're going to be in New Orleans in a few months, come on down. What were your thoughts on Jack Swagger's world title run in 2010? Forgettable. Very forgettable. I'm a guy who cares more about characters and storylines than in-ring ability, and it feels like today's wrestling fans care more about the in-ring stuff and have forgotten what a good character is. How important do you think characters are in wrestling, and what do you think makes a good one? I think characters are very important in wrestling. I'm all for like doing the more realistic stuff and incorporating elements of MMA and that sort of thing, but I grew up on characters. I might not be a wrestling fan right now were it not for all of the characters that I grew up on, like the Macho Man and the $1 Million Man and Jake the Snake, right? A lot of you are probably the same way. Maybe if you grew up later on, it was a completely different set of characters. It was the Undertaker. It was Mankind. It was whoever. So I think characters are very important, especially when it comes to kids. I used to be a kid, believe it or not. I didn't come out of my mother's womb fully grown. That would have been very painful, but I was a kid, and, I have kept up with wrestling for all these years. I've been a fan now for over 30 some odd years. I think you got to get them young. You got to get, and that sounds really creepy, but let me rephrase that. Going all Roy Moore here, but you got to get to them when they're young so that they can, grow into it and they can stick with it. And you're going to have a lot of kids who grow out of it. A lot of my friends grew out of wrestling. They just stopped watching. I was one of the ones who just kept watching. I was the schmuck who kept watching. So I think you need characters for a lot of different reasons. I think as far as what goes into making a good character, I've heard wrestlers say that they've portrayed characters that aren't too much of a departure from who they really are. Or if, let's say there was a wrestler who, when they were younger, was a shot put player, right? So maybe Vince McMahon has him come to TV and be an evil shot put player, right? It's some extension of who they are because it tends to be a little easier for them to portray that character. Like if you came to me and you said, okay, look, you're going to be a wrestler and you're going to be, you're going to portray a hip hop musician, I would say you're out of your fucking mind, because the idea of me portraying a hip hop musician is absolutely laughable. And I would fail miserably at it because I'm not good at that. That's not who I am. I like listening to hip hop, but that doesn't mean that I could be a hip hop artist. I can't. What does that even mean, right? Like, what am I supposed to dress a certain way and act a certain way? Like, I would be a miserable failure if I was told, this is your character, this is what we want you to be. If Terry Taylor gets called into the office and they're like, we got this great idea for you. We want you to be a rooster, and we want you to kind of move your head really weird, and we want you to go ahead and cock people and all that kind of stuff, right? God bless the guy. He did the best he could with it, but it fucked his whole career up. So I would say, based on the experiences of others, that it would probably be a good idea to portray some kind of character that you can buy into, that you can believe in. That's in some way you're taking a part of yourself and you're able to kind of put it into your character and just throw yourself into it. Now that there's a flip side to that. There are guys over the years who have gone way over the edge and they've sort of become their characters. I've heard people say that about Bret Hart, that he really sort of became, like, he believed that he was this Canadian hero and he could do no wrong. And, you don't want to take yourself too seriously. But I think those are some of the elements that make for some of the best characters, the guys that really throw themselves into it. I think one more point on this and then we'll move on. But I think one of the problems with wrestling and one of the problems with WWE today is that a lot of times when I watch the men and the women, when I watch them on TV far too often, and I don't know if this is just because I'm older and so I'm looking at it, in a different way than I was when I was younger, but it looks like a bunch of people who are playing the role of wrestler. They are playing wrestler on TV, as opposed to me watching and actually sort of getting lost in the show and believing that this is who they are. When Steve Austin marched to the ring back in the day with his whole strut, right, and the BMF vest, I didn't look at him and go, wow, this guy's, he's playing the part. He's acting like a tough guy. No, I mean, when I'm watching him, as he's in the middle of doing his job, I'm sort of lost in the moment and I'm thinking, man, this guy's a badass. Look at this guy. And so there's a disconnect there. There's something that changed in wrestling where now I watch a lot of these people and it looks like they're just playing a role. Hey, look at, Alexa Bliss, she's playing wrestler. How cute. Stuff like that. and it happens with the men as well. That's a problem. You've got to just completely throw yourself into that character, and I think to some extent maybe even become that character and get people to believe in it. That's the hardest part, is getting people to believe. And it becomes harder and harder the older you are and the older you get. But I think that's one of the key elements of a successful character. Let's see here. We'll do a few more. We've done a whole bunch of these already. We're already 60 deep. That's what she said. Here we go. Why is the ruthless aggression era not really appreciated? It's not true. I mean, I appreciate it. I like the ruthless aggression era a lot. I just gave praise earlier here in this audio to the tag team division from back then. It was one of the best tag team eras in WWE history. You had the SmackDown 6, and you had all these great teams. Now, it doesn't get as much love as the Attitude Era. Everybody loves to romanticize the Attitude Era so much. That's all you hear about, the Monday Night Wars. I think if WCW never died, those wars would have extended into the early 2000s, and I think people would probably look back a lot more fondly on the Ruthless Aggression Era. It didn't help that one company completely, bit the dust, and we were down to one. So that's a big part, I think, of why people look differently at the Attitude Era than a lot of these other eras. I think people appreciate it. They just don't talk about it as much. But that doesn't mean they don't appreciate it. Could you have bought into Meng getting the push that went to Goldberg in the late 90s? They could have played it off of Meng's real-life reputation as a tough guy and protected his Tongan death grip the way they did the spear and the jackhammer. Do you think people would have gotten as hot from Meng if he was protected the way that Goldberg was? I don't. By that point, he was older. He was slower. I mean, not that he was known for his demon speed to begin with, but yeah, he was older, he was slower, and he had the clown hair. Don't tell him I said that, but he looked completely ridiculous. Like in WCW, he just did. This wasn't Haku in WWE. I mean, this was Meng. He came out wearing pajama bottoms with Sam Roberts haircut on steroids. So I don't know that anybody was really going to take the guy seriously, but I think it would have been hard to take him at that level of a Goldberg. Goldberg just had this cool factor about him, right? He was explosive when he was out there. It has to happen naturally. The biggest reason, I think, is probably he was a new guy. Goldberg was a new guy. We didn't know too much about him. We knew he played football. He played in the NFL. That's about all we knew. He didn't talk. He just came out. He beat people up, and 90 seconds later, he hit the showers. And we really didn't see anybody like that. He was somebody very unique for that time. They were able to start from scratch with him. He came right out of the power plant, and right into WCW he went. And the streak just took off. Now, Meng didn't have a streak. If anything, he had a streak of losses. Meng had been around forever by that point. Everybody knew who he was. He'd been around forever. He was one of the old guys. I think they could have done more to make him out to be almost like their version of what Minoru Suzuki is today in Japan. Right? The resident tough guy, the resident shooter that you don't fuck with. Like, Suzuki's not really a top guy in New Japan, but people respect him. He's still a big name. He's been around a long time. I think that was probably the better role for Meng in WCW, but he wouldn't have gotten over at the same level that Goldberg did. Will AJ Styles end his career with WWE, or will he do a retirement tour on the independents and a short stint either in New Japan or Ring of Honor with farewell matches against some of his longtime rivals? That's going to be up to AJ. I see no reason for him to leave WWE if he's making good money. Aside from Daniels and Okada and Claire Lynch, half of his old rivals are probably in WWE now anyway, so why leave? If you could attend any pay-per-view in history, which one would you choose? Now, I know most of you were going to expect me to say the Royal Rumble 1992, but then I would be deprived of the Gorilla Monsoon, Bobby Heenan commentary. So I'm not going to say the 92 Rumble. The one show, honestly, I regret more than anything not being there live for when I could have been and I should have been, was that first ECW One Night Stand show from the Hammerstein in 2005. I've never had more fun watching a pay-per-view than I did that show, and I watched it from home. And that show was in my backyard. It was in New York City. It was a train ride away. I've been to dozens of shows, dozens of Ring of Honor shows in that building. And I don't remember why, but I didn't go. And I think to be there live for that Sandman entrance alone when he came out to enter Sandman, that would have been worth the price of my ticket alone. I still kick myself for not going to that show. Does Bullet Club have the potential for mainstream appeal, or will they always have their little cult following since they're not part of the WWE machine? Oh, they absolutely have the potential for mainstream appeal. Oh, I mean, all I ever see at these WWE shows are people wearing Bullet Club stuff. If New Japan got a real foothold here in this country, or they got a real TV deal here, Bullet Club stuff would be all over the place. It would be like, I was going to say the NWO. Obviously, it's not the NWO. It's an NWO knockoff, really, if we're being honest. But probably the closest thing to something like that when the NWO got really hot in the late 90s and you saw the logo shirts all over the place. If it could really get a foothold here in this country, I think the whole Bullet Club name and the whole, it's just cool. And I think you'd probably see shirts all over the place for them. Let's see here. What is your opinion of CZW? Yes, there is a lot of violence, but I personally feel that deathmatch wrestlers are gladiators and deserve respect for what they do. I respect all the guys who put their bodies at risk to entertain people, but some of the ultra-violent stuff, like just for the sake of being ultra-violent, it's just not my thing. But I respect all those guys. I mean, at the very least, I think these guys deserve respect for what they do when they go out there. All right, 2 movie questions, and then we're going to call it a day because I apologize here. My voice is just, it's been a long day, put it that way. What movie characters would make the best wrestling personalities? I think Heath Ledger's Joker and Alex from A Clockwork Orange would make amazing wrestling personas. What do you think? Not bad. Not bad. Yeah, I could see the Joker, when he's not working for creative. I guess I can't say RoboCop since we've already seen him in wrestling. I think Snake Plissken, Escape from New York, he'd make a pretty badass babyface. And Hans Gruber from Die Hard. I think he would be a fine choice if they ever did a German version of Lucha Underground, like an underground wrestling fight show, and they needed somebody to fill like the Dario Cueto role. I think Hans Gruber would fit right in there. And finally, what do you think is an underrated horror film made in the 21st century? Well, aside from Monday Night Raw, 10 Cloverfield Lane. 10 Cloverfield Lane. If you've never heard of that movie before, or if you've not seen it, check it out. It was a total money grab to use the Cloverfield name when that movie really didn't, spoiler, it really didn't have a whole lot to do with the original Cloverfield film. It's not even a spoiler. I'm doing you people a favor. If you liked the first Cloverfield film, which I did, and you're excited at the idea that this is like a direct sequel, I'm letting you know right now, lower your expectations because it's not. But they sure did want people to think that. Even so, it's still a great movie. And I know I mentioned his name earlier, but I'll mention it again. John Goodman, really just fantastic in this movie. Really, really, it's his movie. I mean, he owns the whole thing. There's another movie called Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. It does have a lot of humor in it, so if you don't like mixing comedy with your horror movies, kind of like mixing comedy with your wrestling, if you're not a fan of that, then you may not like it. But it's about a guy who, basically he aspires to be the next great slasher, like Jason and Freddy and Michael and them, and he lets a documentary crew follow him around. But it's really, really good. I saw that movie, The Babadook, a few years ago. I didn't like it. I feel like I'm the only one, like one of the only people who saw it who actually didn't care for it. I was completely bored. I fell asleep during parts of it. So I guess I found one thing Raw has in common with The Babadook. So you might like it, though. It got a lot of great reviews. I just, I thought that they were a little over the top with the praise for it. And so let's wrap things up there. That's a lot of questions, and I thank everybody for submitting. If you did submit a question, I apologize to those who I could not get to. Like I said earlier, we'll do more of these in the new year. It's the least I could do to give back to the channel here. All the support that Trax has shown me over the years. You can follow me on Twitter at Solomonster if you want to follow me on there. You guys know you can get full episodes of the Soundoff podcast on thesolomonster.com. Show drops every Sunday as well on iTunes and Stitcher, Google Play, Player.fm, Audio Boom. We're on all those different platforms. The Podbean app, which is free. thank you again for all of your support. Everybody who listens to the clips here on the channel every single week. We're heading into 2018. Hopefully this year will be bigger and better than all the rest before it. So until next time, be well, stay safe. Thank you again to Trax for giving me the chance to do another Q&A. This is the third one, I believe. At least third one I've done here on this channel, and there'll be more to come next year. So until then, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, have a great New Year, and we'll see you back here on TVTraX very soon. Take care, guys.